What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Toma Todito Boxing Show. And not sure if you had a chance to check out the fights this past weekend, but they had pretty good fights on ESPN. We saw they were live from Las Vegas at the Resorts World out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Pretty cool showing that they had. The main event was Zhanibek, Alim Kanuli, Kazakh's Zhanibek against Danny Dignum. And they were fighting for the interim WBO 160-pound interim title. Jermall Charlo was a co-main event. And there was also a couple other guys that you may recognize that got wins on Saturday, in case you missed those. Then later on in the evening, we saw David Benavidez put Phoenix, Arizona on his shoulders, carry Phoenix, Arizona on his shoulders and put him on a high note and put the world on notice as he came away with another crazy knockout victory. Something that was to be expected against one David Lemieux. It was one of those fights that you were just curious to tune in to see how it was going to come about, how the fight would end, and what David Lemieux had left in the tank, as he's campaigning at 168 pounds now. And but you kind of knew that it was going to be heading in the direction of that the victory would be heading in the direction of one David Benavidez, who's a towering monster at that division at 168. So we'll talk about that here a little bit later. And let's start with the ESPN card. The two fighters that I mentioned that you may very well recognize. Adam Lopez was on the undercard. He fought an 8-round fight and he ended up securing a win. He's back on his winning ways. He got the unanimous decision win over William Encarnacion. And if you remember, Adam Lopez has losses to notable fighters. His first loss came at the hands of Stephen Fulton, and that was back in the 122-pound days when Adam Lopez campaigned there. Stephen Fulton is looking to unify that division and become undisputed at 122. And we saw him in that crazy fight last year against Figueroa. Adam Lopez's other loss came at the hands of Oscar Valdez. He was stopped in the 7th round by one Oscar Valdez. That happened in 2019, late 2019. And then his last defeat came at the hands of Isaac Dogbe, which a lot of people thought it should have been the fight of the year, at least nominated for a runner-up, a fight of the year, because it was that good. That they ended up fighting for an NABF title. That was just a little bit over a year ago. I believe it was mid-June that they ended up fighting of 2021. Crazy fight that they got in. Dogbe got the majority decision win. It was a 10-rounder and walked away with the NABF title. So that's Adam Lopez's last defeat and his third to date. Adam Ochoa was his last opponent, and that fight happened in November of last year in a fight in which it ended up being a no contest. It was they only fought 2 rounds out of the 8, and the fight ended up being deemed a no contest. That was against Adam Ochoa. Now he faced William Encarnacion, and he ends up giving Encarnacion the 3rd loss of his career, and Adam Lopez is back on his winning ways. The other fighter that you may recognize that was on the undercard of this fight is of this card was none other than Jesse Magdaleno. Jesse Magdaleno fought Eddie Valencia Mercado. It was pretty much a one-sided affair, one-sided fight. Jesse Magdaleno was in control from beginning to end. Also an 8-round fight. Jesse Magdaleno secured the victory, and this is the 4th win in a row for him. So hopefully we'll see him in a big co-main event or a headlining a future event, hopefully this year. Jesse Magdaleno's a lot of action. So is Adam Lopez. So we'll see what awaits these guys. And both of them ended up campaigning at the 126 for this past fight at featherweight. So we end up moving to the co-main event, and one in which we had Jermall Charlo scheduled. There were multiple fighters that were announced that were going to be fighting Jermall Charlo, and the card ended up changing. The last minute stand-in was young prospect Jermaine Ortiz, and Jermaine Ortiz ended up walking away with the victory. He was just too much energy, too much power, too fast, throwing punches in different angles, and the rhythm was just too much for Jermall Herring to be able to control throughout the fight. It was a pretty entertaining fight. Jermall Herring did look good, but he started running out of gas down the stretch and started taking his foot off the gas pedal down the stretch, down the last few rounds. Jermaine Ortiz capitalized on that, started landing some bigger punches. He started putting together better combinations, walked away with the unanimous decision win in a 10-round fight. Jermaine Ortiz campaigns in this division. He's looking to move up to 140 pounds unless he gets a big name fight at 135, which is what he's looking for. He's looking to get on that fast track and start challenging the who's who at 135. 135 is one of the scariest divisions and one of the most packed divisions right now. And we're about to more than likely have a undisputed champion decided here in a couple weeks. I say more than likely, maybe 98% chance that we will have an undisputed champ in the 8th of this era announced here in a couple weeks, as Devin Haney will be facing George Kambosos, and they're fighting for all the titles at 135. I say more than likely because you can't discard the fact that there may be a draw. Who knows? We saw it with Castaño Charlo, and now Charlo just ended up finishing Castaño and putting an end to all those doubters and arguments and discussions that were up in the air. He ended up, by stopping Castaño, he basically put an end to all that, all the noise, and let everybody know that he's the king at 154. That is potentially going to happen here at 135. Chances are that we will have a winner. Hopefully, it's not a one that raises a lot more polemic than it should. Hopefully it's not one that leaves a sour taste, because when fights get so big and there's so much money involved in these fights, there tends to be some type of drama or BS that occurs. And then the fans end up losing because we end up getting a crappy decision that we don't agree with. We end up seeing the fight one way and the judges call it another, and blah, blah, blah. Well, Devin Haney has traveled out to Australia. They will be fighting out of the Marvel Stadium, and George Kambosos will be the hometown hero that night. He has all the titles except for one, and that's the one that Devin Haney's bringing to the ring with him, that being the WBC title. With that said, that's the elite at 135. Jermaine Ortiz is ready to get in the mix with any of those fighters. Jermall Herring is on the other end of the spectrum, in which this is a back-to-back loss for him. He lost his title to Shakur Stevenson in his last outing. Now he moves up to a new division, walks away with a loss, and we just saw this happen with another top-level fighter in that of Miguel Berchelt, who was knocked out by Oscar Valdez, lost his throne at 130, and the stranglehold he had on that division. Valdez took that title from him, knocked him out. Berchelt, having announced time and again that he was having more and more issues making that weight, decided to no longer put himself through the stresses of making 130 pounds, ended up making 135 pounds, stepped into the ring against Jeremiah Nakatila, and got a one-sided beatdown handed to him. And he was eventually stopped in that fight. He debuted in a new division and was stopped in consecutive fights. Jermall Herring makes a debut in a new division, one division north of where he was a former champion of, and loses. Not as bad as Berchelt, but he lost. He lost his second consecutive fight in what was his debut at 135. And to me, I don't know, but both of those fighters I just mentioned seem to be at a crossroads. They seem to be either on the fence on whether they should walk away from the sport, if they already hit their ceiling and they're starting to head on their way down, if there's something that may be interrupting their training, maybe something that they need to change, or... that's how I see Berchelt and Jermall Herring right now, whether they're going to stick with the sport and continue fighting through this this slope that they seem to find themselves on, or if they're going to call it a day. I would love to see both of those fighters in the ring against one another. Miguel Berchelt, Jamel Herring at 135, and that would be a true crossroads fight for both fighters. If it's a stoppage either way, if it's a decision loss for either party, those questions, those doubts may become a reality or may answer those doubts for each of them respectively, whoever would be the losing party. And depending on how they lose, they would probably make the decision of walking away from the sport and focusing their energy elsewhere, whether cornering prospects or developing new talent away from the sport, maybe involving themselves in commenting and joining a network per se. Jamel Herring has done that in the past. So that's a fight that I would really like to see, and both of these fighters would be perfect to step in the ring against one another. Jamel Herring, Miguel Berchelt. That would be not just would it be a fan-friendly fight, not only would it garner a lot of attention and be a really popular fight with the fight fans, but it would also be a meaningful fight in each of their careers. They would be facing top opposition, and they're both at a crossroads moment of decision making as far as it goes, as far as regarding each of their respective careers. And should one of them or both of them decide to continue, that is the level of opposition that they want to test themselves against. They're both top level fighters, and win or lose, that would be a fight that they would both want to be involved in, and that we as fans would want to see. At least I do. I don't know what you think, but I think Berchelt and Jamel Herring would be an awesome fight. Both of them moving up to a new division. This would be a good way to settle in against one another and figure out what they got left in the tank. Both in similar positions in their respective careers. With that said, we move on to the main event. For Jermaine Ortiz, before I move on to Zhanibek, for Jermaine Ortiz, I mean, he's asking for the big timers. I mean, dang, I hate to see a young career just be stopped. And we're going to talk about that in the main event, because when they're on the up and up and up and up, and they feel like the fighter feels like they're unstoppable, and then they end up stepping in against somebody who's a little more savvy, a more veteran fighter, someone with more tricks up their sleeve or better developed, and taking a beat down or being stopped by knockout, or it could throw a huge wrench in said fighter's career and potentially derail their plans and possibly even ending those careers, because the fighter not only loses confidence, but a lot of times they just the blow that they would take to their morale, to their pride, to their ego, when they're on a complete high and believing their own hype, it sucks. It's sad to see, and we've seen it at the highest levels, and we've seen it with fighters who are up and coming when promotional companies are just throwing fighters as bait, as food, as chum for the other fighter who they happen to be promoting. We saw with Gennady Golovkin how they would just throw these fighters that were starting to make a name for themselves or that had decent recognition with decent records and just throw them in there, and Gennady Golovkin would end up busting them up and hurting them. Zhanibek is another fighter that seems to be on that track right now. And we would see these fighters that become monsters in the ring by way of how they're stopping their opponents. And it's because they're fighting decent opposition like Jermaine Ortiz, who are developing themselves, who are coming into their own, and they end up jumping in too soon against the elite of the divisions or the greats in their divisions. Jermaine Ortiz is asking for him. Be careful what you wish for, but if I was to put him in against somebody right now at 135, I would say, let's pin him against Rayo Valenzuela. If you want to fight somebody that's a firefight for him, let's put him against Rayo Valenzuela. That would be a perfect fight, and those styles would make for an awesome showing. Not sure what you think, but let me know. I think Jermaine Ortiz, Rayo Valenzuela would be an awesome fight at 135. So we move on to Zhanibek, who ended up dismantling of Danny Dignum. Dignum fighting out of the UK with a decent record, gets his first defeat, and it was a nasty one. Zhanibek I believe this was the 6th stoppage in a row, and he's 12-0 now, and it's the 6th stoppage in a row for him. He's 12-0 with 8 knockouts. The last 6 fights have all been by stoppage in one way or another, and his power is getting better, his punching is getting better, his combinations are getting more fluid. And the punch that he landed and stopped this fight with, not only did he land a barrage of punches against Danny Dignum as he was against the ropes, punches that ended up folding Dignum forward. And while Dignum protects his face facing down, Zhanibek ended up sneaking in that brick of an uppercut, left uppercut at that, snuck it in between the gloves, and you just saw Dignum lose all life in that body momentarily, caved to the ground, went to sleep, and Zhanibek is now your WBO interim champion at 160 pounds. Zhanibek has taken issue with Golovkin. Of course, Golovkin ended up taking the nickname of Mexican style because Abel Sanchez was selling him as a fan-friendly fighter, and because Abel Sanchez and his heritage, being Hispanic, being of Mexican descent, he started using Golovkin to sell him as a fan-friendly fighter, and started using the moniker of Mexican style. So people started attaching that to Gennady Golovkin. I bring this side note up because Zhanibek, if you look at the front of his shorts, if you look at his nickname, he goes by Kazakh style. And he's taken issue with Gennady Golovkin in the past, where he says he's proud of his roots and his heritage and he doesn't need to represent any other country. Kazakh style, the Kazakh style is one that is powerful, and they come out to destroy their opponents. And so now he's taking the Kazakh style and trying to sell it to the forefront and let everybody know where he's from and who he's representing. Just imagine if we end up getting a Zhanibek-Gennady Golovkin fight. This would be not just huge business for Kazakhstan, it would raise the level of Asia and European style fight, at least the Asian and European boxing. It would put it at the forefront, especially if it's in an American stage. And all the fighters that are coming out of the smaller countries and with smaller followings, this would be their fight. Gennady Golovkin came from nothing and made himself into a household name, especially because of the rivalry with CANELO. Zhanibek was asked about this during the post-fight in-ring interview, and he said it is tradition in their country to not challenge and go against those that precede them, their elders, out of respect. So he's not trying to he called out all the champions at 160, but he didn't want to mention Gennady Golovkin's name until the interviewer, I think it was Mark Kriegel that was interviewing him for ESPN. He ends up bringing up the Triple G question, and that was Zhanibek's response. Is it out of the question? No. He just said it is tradition that we don't want to challenge our elders, challenge those that precede us, is what was his response. Very respectful. But do you think Zhanibek will hold back if they offer that fight against him? Absolutely not. 1. 2. Not just would it be a big money fight for him, not only would it put Kazakhstan at the forefront of boxing for the lead up to the fight and the fight itself, but it would be a meaningful fight at the moment, especially if it does happen. It would be a meaningful fight within the 160-pound division because Gennady Golovkin just beat Ryota Murata for a second title, just unified the division. Triple G, at his age, at the stage in which he finds himself in, he's 41 years of age now and has unified the division. He's the only one to do so. Demetrius Andrade is looking to campaign one division north. He just defended his title for the 6th time, I believe, which is a WBO middleweight title. And if he campaigns at 168, because he's chasing the bigger names and the bigger fights, Zhanibek could very well, with this win, having secured the interim version of the WBA title, the interim version to Andrade's title, with Andrade moving up, should he vacate, the WBO may very well elevate Zhanibek to full status, therefore becoming the WBO champ, rather than a mandatory to Andrade. And he could very well unify the division against Gennady Golovkin, which would be a huge fight. Not just for the fans, because that's a fan-friendly fight. Both of these are power punchers with good style, with good flow, with accuracy and efficiency, boxing at an all-time level. They fight with efficiency, with strategy, and it would be not just a chess match, but it would be a bombs away type of chess match. This would be more of battleship than chess if Triple G steps into the ring against Zhanibek. The other champion that we're not mentioning, Jermall Charlo. Charlo is going to be fighting Maciej Sulecki late June, I believe it's June 18th. Maciej Sulecki is no joke. He's been in there with the big names at 160. He's no one to sleep on. Jermall Charlo has his hands full, and I favor Jermall Charlo to come out victorious in that fight. So he has a fight lined up for him as well. His name keeps getting mentioned, and it was just mentioned this past Saturday by one David Benavidez. Demetrius Andrade's been calling him out. Jermall Charlo was almost, I believe at the beginning of this year, was in negotiations to fight Canelo Alvarez, negotiations that went south. So, we don't know. But Jermall Charlo says he wants to make the legacy. He's trying to cement his legacy at 160. I don't know what the plans are for Jermall Charlo, but I do know that he has a fight coming up. And if he looks impressive, and if he defends his title and his throne once again, why keep looking for the big fight with Canelo? Unify with Demetrius Andrade. And if Andrade vacates, because Andrade is supposed to be fighting Zach Parker, I believe, at 168, if Zhanibek is willing to unify, Triple G just did and holds 2 of the 4 titles, and Charlo wins his fight and defends his throne against Sulecki, the WBC title, either Charlo and Zhanibek or Charlo and Golovkin, and then if Zhanibek gets elevated to full status, that's the fight. If Andrade comes back to 160, then unify with Zhanibek and then get into. Meanwhile, that buys time for that other big fight to happen. Gennady Golovkin right now is the only one that just fought and unified. Andrade, if his fight with Zach Parker falls through, if it goes through, great. Let's see how he looks at 168. If it falls through, then get into the unification with Zhanibek. Let's unify the WBO. And then go after Triple G by the end of the year. If the fight with Zach Parker goes through, then towards the latter half of the year, unify with Zhanibek. Charlo successful against Sulecki. Then close out the year with a big showdown against Triple G. And in the first quarter of next year, we will have a fight for the undisputed champion at 160. Just like Jermall did at 154. Then Jermall would end up securing his legacy at 160 and start focusing on what the paydays and what's next for him at that stage. But he's in a perfect position right now of control at 160, and he's starting to develop an all-new style. Jermall is. After his fight with Montiel, there was demons that presented themselves there in the fight, and doubts and questions that presented themselves in the fight, and he answered them all during that fight. He fought those demons during that fight because the fight wasn't going his way, and he ended up finding himself in troubled waters, and ended up fighting through it and walked away with the decision, deservingly so. The decision win over Macias Montiel. 160 is at a good spot right now, and I can't wait to see how that plays out. Zhanibek is a monster, and now he holds a piece of a title, and he's going to be trouble for Triple G. He's going to be trouble for Andrade. He's going to be trouble for Charlo. And I'm not discounting Sulecki. If Sulecki ends up beating, which he very well could because he's maintained himself amongst the top-ranked fighters at 160, if he beats Charlo, you bet that Zhanibek and Sulecki would happen faster than if any of the other fighters are holding the title. Sulecki has a loss to Demetrius Andrade on his record already. So you bet he probably wants to correct that wrong and come after Andrade if he gets a second shot at it. Pretty interesting. So awesome stuff that happened there during those fights, during that card. We got Adam Lopez on the way up again. We got Jesse Magdaleno continues his winning ways. Jamel Herring at a crossroads stage in his career. Jermaine Ortiz maybe asking for too much, but maybe at the right spot. You know, maybe he's feeling it right now. He may be at the right spot in one or two more fights, and he may become a household name. Zhanibek, similar stage, and with the title around his waist now, sits at 12-0 with the title or a portion of a title around his waist, and the sky's the limit for these fighters right now. Can't wait to see what the future holds for them. We move on to what happened later in the evening with David Benavidez, and David Benavidez was in a showdown against power puncher Canadian star David Lemieux. David Benavidez ends up stopping him in the third round in what was an entertaining fight. It was a fan-friendly, entertaining fight. We knew it was going to be like that. And I was leaning, obviously, towards David Benavidez, as most of you were, that he was going to make easy work of David Lemieux. When you think of David Lemieux, we think of the wars that he's been involved in. We think of his fan-friendly style. He likes to throw punches in bunches and power punches at that, and ends up gassing out later on down the final stretch of the fights. Because he throws everything with bad intentions. He has good combinations, decent speed. But when you're looking at these two fighters just on paper, and then when you see the weigh-in and you see the height difference, the reach difference, power, reach, starts leaning towards David Benavidez, and someone who's known as a knockout artist as David Benavidez is, you start seeing that he's just going to tower over Lemieux. He's got good speed himself, and he was just going to be too much for Lemieux, and it played out pretty much how I thought. I didn't think it was going to go as early. I thought it was going to be between the 4th and 6th round. Benavidez made quicker work of David Lemieux, stopped him in 3 rounds, and now has the interim WBC 168-pound title. It's the 3rd time that he's held some form of the WBC title in that weight. And with that interim, he basically becomes Canelo Alvarez's mandatory. Which it's all everything's aligning itself for David Benavidez. He is right. He has been right. He continues to say, I'm just going to keep fighting and let everything align itself. Let everything play out how it does. Let everything play out how it will. I'm just going to keep fighting, keep winning, and eventually we'll get to these big name fighters. He wants Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant and the Benavidez family, especially against Jose Benavidez, there's history there. They've had a little scrap before in the gym. There's history there between him and exchanging words with his dad. There's history there between David Benavidez and Caleb. There's history behind that fight. There's bad blood between them. That would be a good fight. That's one that David Benavidez wants. Caleb Plant was the last fighter that Canelo fought to be able to unify and become the undisputed champ at 168. Caleb Plant is at the top of the division still. That would be an awesome fight. Demetrius Andrade has been calling everybody out and unable to secure the fights. He's called out Charlo, he's called out Canelo, he's called out Triple G, and he's called out Benavidez at times where they've actually gone back and forth and exchanged words. Now he's looking to campaign at 168, as we just mentioned earlier in the episode. Demetrius Andrade, who's looking to fight Zach Parker, would be a great fight for David Benavidez. They're both tall, they're both lanky, they both got good reach. Demetrius Andrade has a little bit more of an awkward style to Benavidez' more disciplined style, and they're both hard punchers, so it would be an interesting fight and a better payday for both, which would be a notorious fight for them. And the bigger they sell, the more they sell, you bet that it's going to catch the attention of a bigger name fighter. David Benavidez with Andrade would be a fan-friendly fight. David Benavidez with Jermall Charlo, because that name keeps coming up as well at 168, even though Charlo, we just mentioned him, he's the WBC champ at 160. That would be a payday type of showdown, a mega fight, if you will. Charlo and Benavidez, they would fight at 168. I think it'd be kind of hard for Benavidez to cut down to 160 in challenge for the WBC title there. So I think Charlo would be moving up. That would be a big showdown type fight. With Andrade, not as big a payday, but it would be a fan-friendly fight. And that would be another bombs away type of fight. With Caleb Plant, that would be the more meaningful fight within the division. A fighter who just lost his title, relinquished his title to Canelo Alvarez, who now holds all the titles to the division. Caleb Plant is just one fight removed from that happening and could easily get himself a victory over Benavidez. And easily get himself, not easily, but with a victory over David Benavidez, which that would be possibly one of the harder tests. If Canelo was hard, David Benavidez would probably be just as tough. I don't mean easily in the sense of opposition. I mean easily align himself back into a big showdown against Canelo and challenge him for all the titles by winning this mandatory WBC version that David Benavidez just won on Saturday. Caleb Plant, with the victory over Benavidez, would get himself right back into the Canelo stakes and challenging down the line for all the belts and trying to get back atop not just one sanctioning body's throne, but the throne for the division, if he was to rematch and possibly defeat Canelo Alvarez. More meaningful for Benavidez, Caleb Plant. Fan-friendly, Andrade. Payday, Charlo. And the other fight that's there, if he doesn't get Canelo Alvarez in his next outing, because he is the mandatory, the WBC may very well step in. WBC tends to side quite a bit with Canelo Alvarez. That's their dog. That's their horse right there. They tend to side with Canelo Alvarez, so I doubt that they're going to put any pressure on him. But you may very well see the Benavidez-Canelo fight by May. If we don't see it in September, we may very well see it in May, and we may likely see Canelo Triple G at 168 in September to put an end to that trilogy. If that happens to be in the works, with Canelo losing to Bivol, we don't know what the strategy is now. The plan was victory over Bivol, then go on to beat Triple G or face Triple G in that trilogy, and by December time, late November, December, face Ilunga Makabu for that cruiserweight title, and just keep climbing up and keep cementing his legacy. With that loss over Bivol, he doesn't lose any of the 168 titles, but now the talks and the plans may have been derailed because now Canelo wants to right that wrong and possibly get himself into a rematch with Bivol, which would potentially be what's happening in September. Should he be victorious then we would possibly be seeing his attempt at conquering cruiserweight gold against Makabu, and Triple G would go off to the wayside. Then that would open the books up for Triple G, at least the planning books, and he could possibly get into a big Kazakhstan-style fight against Zhanibek or Charlo or Andrade, depending on what the other fighters are doing within that division. So that's how all of them are kind of correlated right now, all these fighters that we keep mentioning. The one fight that we're not mentioning right now that David Benavidez could take on is the PBC's version of Lomachenko, The PBC tried to start their own version of a Lomachenko and basically boost this fighter up to put him on the fast track to a title, in which they did, and that is one David Morrell. Cuban fighter David Morrell, who is a very decorated amateur fighter. He holds the regular version of the WBA or the WBA World Championship at 168. Another that is a potential mandatory or a mandatory for CANELO. At that, because he holds the world, CANELO holds the Super Championship title at 168. So David Morrell would be a fight for CANELO, just like David Benavidez is now in line with the WBC interim version around his waist. David Morrell and Benavidez would be not just a good fight, it wouldn't be as popular of a fight as any of the other ones that we mentioned, but for David Benavidez, a victory over David Morrell, and this wouldn't be easy work. David Morrell is tall, he's long, he's got good power behind him. He's got a good fan-friendly style as well with good boxing behind him, but he's 6 or 7 fights into his professional career and he struggled a bit with his past opposition, even though he's looking better and better every fight. Let's just say that. He is looking better and better every fight, but he's not there at the same level as these other names that we're mentioning. Yet he holds the WBA world title right now. So if he's holding that title, that would be a big fight for David Benavidez to not just take that title, the world title for WBA. Should he be victorious against David Morrell, I would favor Benavidez over Morrell, even though I like David Morrell. I mentioned that he's the PBC's version of Lomachenko because they put him on a fast track, just like Bob Arum and Top Rank did for Lomachenko. Being decorated amateurs, they wanted to put him on the fast track and build a fan-friendly fighter and put him at the forefront, make him a recognizable name, and just put him on that fast track to stardom, if you may. David Morrell is, or Osvaldo Morrell, as I know him, at least when he started coming up, he's a great fighter. Great fighter who still continues to develop his skills, who still continues to improve each and every fight. And I feel that it would be a detriment to him to fight David Benavidez at this stage of his young career. However, he is very experienced. He is very savvy, very decorated in the amateur ranks, and he holds a portion of a major title right now. If you're gonna hold a major title, you gotta go against the big dogs. So it's not out of the question. I would not want to see him against David Benavidez, but David Morrell's no pushover either. I feel that it would be too soon for him to step in there. Maybe he needs to be tested with some better opposition right now, with better opposition at least in the top 10s. But should he find himself in a fight with David Benavidez now, putting his WBA title on the line, I think he would fare okay. He's 6-0. I'm bringing him up right now. He's 6-0 with 5 knockouts. He's got a fight coming up here June 4th against Kelvin Henderson. And Kelvin Henderson sits with a 15-1-1 record with 11 knockouts. So he's a hard hitter. I don't know much about Kelvin Henderson. His nickname's Hot Sauce. He's fighting out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. 15-1-1 record. We'll see how he looks, but I'm looking at Osvaldo's resume, and I'm looking at Henderson's resume right now, and I don't see anybody of note that stands out, but a lot of decent records that he's faced, and he's got 11 knockouts. 11 of his 15 victories have come by way of stoppage. So he's got power behind him. So this is a test that David Morrell is now going to face a tougher, heavier-handed opponent in Henderson in this fight coming up in June. Should he be victorious, Morrell would improve to 7-0. and depending whether he gets the knockout or so, but he would have his 7th victory. Should he be victorious over Henderson? We'll see. I'm going to be tuning into that fight to see how he looks. His last victory came against Alantes Fox. From there, he beat Mario Abel Casares, Mike Gravansky before that, Lennox Allen, Quinton Rankin, and Yendris Rodriguez Valdez. Was his first outing as a pro. So his fight against Lennox Allen was the one that was deemed for the interim WBA title. And then he was elevated against Casares. He was elevated to the full version of that title. So he's the world champ for the WBA at 168. We'll see how he looks. David Morrell would probably be the easier of the fights to be made. It would be one of those that I'm talking about, Jermaine Ortiz earlier in the episode, that it would be kind of those throwing a wrench in somebody's career, because it could definitely be detrimental to David Morrell's development and David Morrell's streak as he continues to improve and develop his skills within the pro ranks. He's so young to be holding, young as far as record-wise goes, to be holding that kind of title at the moment. But it's the WBA, and the WBA does this time and again. David Morrell is going to fight Kelvin Henderson. Should he be victorious and he ends up getting in a fight scheduled to fight a monster like David Benavidez, I would obviously tune in. It wouldn't be the biggest fight that David Benavidez could make, but it would be a necessary fight for David Benavidez to continue his ascension within the division, and in order to definitely get him closer to dragging those bigger names in to sign the dotted line and get into the ring with him. Caleb Plant, Jermall Charlo would be the more lucrative of the deals should he land one of those. Obviously, the CANELO would be the biggest fan-friendly showdown and the biggest payday for David Benavidez, and it would be a big payday for Canelo Alvarez at that, because people keep asking him to get into the ring with David Benavidez. People are clamoring for this fight, for Canelo to fight David Benavidez. After David Benavidez, who else is left? Who else are people going to ask for Canelo to take on? Either the trilogy with Triple G, if it doesn't happen, either a rematch with Bivol at 175, or letting Bivol come down to 168 and challenge Canelo for all his titles. David Benavidez seems to be the biggest fight there is to make for Canelo right now. Canelo Benavidez would be a huge, marketable, lucrative fight for both parties. The trilogy with Triple G would just be more of a legacy fight, more of a shutting up the doubters and the haters type thing that it never happened. And it would be entertaining at that. The fight with Bivol, well, that's just fresh in our heads right now, and obviously fresh in Canelo's head, and he's going to try to right that wrong before he gets away from him, like the Mayweather one did. That he was never able to right that wrong or right that blemish on his record. As far as Benavidez, Caleb Plant, Benavidez, Charlo, those would be the more lucrative in my eyes. The fan-friendly, similar to what we just saw Saturday with David Lemieux, I see the Demetrius Andrade fight going with David Benavidez. Andrade, obviously, a little bit better quality fighter than David Lemieux, better record. It would sell. The fight would sell. Demetrius Andrade would definitely sell the fight. He's a big talker. So there would be a good build up to that fight, and I would see it similar to how I saw Saturday's fight. I think David Benavidez, how consistent, how precise, how efficient he is with his punches, and the power that he delivers his punches with would be too much for Demetrius Andrade, and he would stop him possibly later than 3 rounds. I would say that it would go maybe in the second half of the fight, anywhere after the 5th and 6th round. I think we would start seeing Benavidez accumulate the damage and stopping Andrade. I don't see that fight going to a decision at all. But it would be a good showing for both. So we'll see what the boxing gods are planning for us fans. But a lot of cool cool fights that happened this past Saturday, and pretty cool that we got a chance to tune in. If you didn't get a chance to tune in, check him out. Definitely check out Zhanibek, because he just basically opened up the landscape to the 160-pound division. A lot more options available now, and made it a little scarier for the other opponents, because Zhanibek is no joke. He's up and coming. He's got a young record with a lot of power. He's hungry, and he's bound to make noise in that division for some time to come. So I'll leave you guys all with that. Thank you guys again for tuning in. A lot that happened this past Saturday, and I'll keep bringing you guys episodes here in the coming days. Take care of yourselves. Don't forget to download. Don't forget to rate the show, and spread the word. Tell your friends. If they don't happen to have iTunes or Apple Music, if they don't happen to have Spotify or iHeartRadio or what have you, this show is available on every single one of the major platforms. Deezer is also a very popular platform, and seems to be doing very well on there. So any of the major podcast platforms, you'll be able to find this show there. Thank you guys again for all the love, for the continued support. Check me out on Instagram as I continue to upload the episodes there, usually when they happen. And thank you guys. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Talk to you all in the next episode. Take care.